Okay, so now we've had our zipper sewn to the back side with our tail in between, and we left it open here so that we can sew the two panels, the front panel and the top panel together and get through the ends. That will all stay right there. So what we're going to do is we slide the front panel so that the outer part of the fabrics are face to face. You'll notice that there is a spout and a pout. We'll put that toward the center.
Regarding the center zipper sleeve, the spout and the pout should show up as shown here. It doesn't because we patterned this from the forward panel. It should have been patterned to the top panel. If it had, the spout and the pout would be on top as shown here.
Okay, now we're going to turn it around so your spout and your pout will be opposite sides.
The center zipper sleeve hems are facing up.
We're going to center this.
These assemblies should be centered along the center notch or center line of each one of the panel patterns.
And then on this, we're going to match up our center. And we also have zipper notches here. And just like the other zipper, we put a hem on the end so they will fall short on the inside a little bit. Base the top edge opposite
As
the
discussed
zipper.
earlier, the spout and pout would be on the opposite side. We want to put basting tape on the side that is finished. The hems are underneath. We'll then baste these assemblies together, making sure the center line is all lined up and the raw edge is nice and flush.
Our center. Now we'll sew from one end to the other.
Deb did not use basting tape on the large panels. You can do that to make it easier for sewing if you'd like.
We still also have our splice notches that will line up when we sew the two together, splice to the splice. And we patterned these the same curve in here, same edge coming down, and then we flip back. You can flip back your zipper and the tail, and as I said before, this will get sewn right off the end. So we're going to start here, and as we go, we're going to match notches. And just like before, if you'd like to start at your splice, mark up your notches and maybe come down maybe a foot or 2 feet. You can go ahead and put another tick mark if you'd like. Sometimes they're very helpful to have more tick marks than what we start out with. But it's easier when you get ready to sew it together to walk it around the edges so that it is even. That way you know your tick marks are going to fall in the same spot.
Deb's not going to be using basting tape to do this. We recommend that you use basting tape. It's a lot easier. That way you don't have to worry about things moving.
So I'm just going to go ahead and pinch this and slide it back and start sewing my 1/2 inch seam. And again, you want to back stitch and then just keep your edges together.
We're sewing a straight stitch a 1/2 inch from the raw edge, keeping the edges lined up.
Once you get so far, you can go ahead and look for the tick marks that you made.
If you use basting tape, you don't have to worry about that.
Just like before, about a foot away from the foot. You want to make sure that it's going to be even and just kind of hold it back until you get almost up to where you are, and then you can slide things around so that it's more comfortable sewing and you can get a better grip. Mark your notches and continue going with your 1/2 inch. Your notch is still going to meet up. And then we've made other notches, tick marks, whichever you'd like.
We'll not show the rest of this sewing until we get to the end of this sewing seam.
It's a Amazing, isn't it? How both ends came out exactly the same. Right at the tip. Okay, now we have the zipper and the front panel sewn to the top panel. So now we're going to go inside and top stitch on the top panel the seam that we just sewed here. But we need to turn
Since
it
the window will
around.
be facing down on the floor, we're going to take some newspaper and try to protect it from
What I'm going to
scratches.
do is I'm going to just take these and lay it here inside the cover. We're going to throw the window over on top of it. And this is just the paper that we have from the window treatment itself when it came. It's wrapped around it when you get your window. And being tissue paper, while we're doing this, even if you stitch through it, it'll pull right out of the stitches, but you want to try to keep it back, but you want to keep it under the window so it's protected because you don't want a bunch of scratching. So we're going to come down here and start here at the edge, and we're going to sew a top stitch at 1/8 inch in from our fold here. You want to pull it in away from the window toward the center top panel. In this case, on the 2 bow frame, it'll be your back panel.
This top stitch should be approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. You'll notice as Deb feeds this top stitch through the sewing machine, she's careful to pull the seam apart so that the fold is directly on top of that previous stitch we did earlier. From the underside of the material, she's being sure that the flap of fabric is facing to the right so that the stitch is going through the flap of fabric. We'll show you that a little bit later on.
And again, you want to work 4 to 6 inches away from the front of your foot. And the window is going to want to go back and forth a little bit, so just the stiffness of it's going to push. So you want to make sure you have it laid flat and then pull your seam where you're going to sew, or it could cause you to sew in to your fabric. Okay, now you'll feel underneath that we're coming up to the zipper where it's sewn on. You want to make sure that your zipper is pushed back and the seam is brought this way. So underneath, you're going to have this toward the tissue paper in the window, and we're going to be sewing here. But if this comes up this way, then you're going to end up pinching and leaving less room for your bow to lay in here correctly. So you want to make sure that that's pushed back out of the way. And then just continue sewing across till you get to the other side. Have that top stitching all done along the top edge. This is our window, of course, that we haven't cut out yet. So now we're going to turn it over, and our 36-inch zipper is in here, and we're going to attach that to the top. And we can get rid of our tissue paper for now. Turn it around. Okay, now what we're going to want to do here is bring this fabric down here as flat as possible.
Regarding the center zipper sleeve, you would see this out in the pout right now.
This is going to
Then
come
they're
down
placed
now.
on top of the panel so they'd be hidden now, even though they show up on the top side here. Ignore that, please.
Mark probably 3 or 4 spots where this falls at, because we need to move that a 1/2 inch back toward the window. That helps create a better pocket for the zipper for your framing, and you want to come down flat as you can. Make a mark. Flat as you can. Make a mark. Okay, and this is where the end of the zipper is going to fall. So we want to move that back now so that there's a 1/2 inch difference where it was sitting. Actually, on the end, when we make this line, we kind of want to make it come across here. That way we know how far back we want to go with the zipper. That way we're not starting way back here, and we should be up here. So we're going to mark it down a 1/2 inch from that start point. And then we're going to come back here and run through here. We're just going to mark it a 1/2 inch up. Okay, our initial mark. And then we want to mark the end of the pocket, because this doesn't have a stop end like the other. Okay, now that we have those marks on there, we're going to take the zipper off, because it's easier to sew with just the zipper. But one thing that you want to know is you want your teeth going in toward the pocket. If you take your zipper off, flip it up there and start sewing down here, you're going to bring your zipper over and you're not going to be able to sew it to it. So you want to make sure that you get it positioned in the right way and flip it over so you got the right side to put your basting tape on. And then your tick mark should be like every 12 to 6 inches, whichever, just so that there's enough to where you can hold your zipper, tack it down. But we are a 1/2 inch toward the seam line.
We'll apply basting tape just as we did previously with other zippers.
Okay, now we're ready to put it back on. We've got our basting tape. You have your corner mark that we made when the zipper was down and we slid it up. So we're going to start it there and then just work it over.
Just match up the zipper with your tick marks. We'll then take it over to the sewing machine and sew as we did previous zippers earlier. Same procedure.
Now you notice I'm on the other side of the zipper with this foot, but it will ride just nicely right down the side and stitch right to the edge, away from the teeth far enough to where there won't be any problem with the slider. And then again, back tack. Okay, now we have our other side to finish up that has the tail coming out of it here. We're going to start back. We're going to sew our tail right down off the end of the front and the top panels. We want to come out into over those stitches slightly so we make sure that none of them are going to show when we get to the other side, right side of the top.
Continue stitching all the way down to where that tail runs over the edge. The tail's a little bit long, so we'll have to trim it. We kind of expected that from the beginning. Before we trim the tail, we're going to switch it to the other side and sew that tail down as well.
Sew this down here, and then we're going to trim this off and bind it. So we'll start back here on the pocket. Come up to our 1/2 inch. Keep your edge together. Across the seam. Right down off the tip. Back tack. So now we're going to top stitch this edge. You have your pocket and your tail And we want to top stitch on this top panel with your zipper. Make sure your zipper is out again, because we are going to be pulling this in, and we don't want it top stitched down to where it won't let the bow go straight into the pocket. So we're going to flip that out. Make sure that everything is pushed out. I'm going to turn it around here. And we have our top cover against the front. The front is shorter, so we're able to do this step without catching the front panel. And then with all of this pulled out, start down at the end here. And we'll do all of our cutting when we get done with our top stitch. And again, you want to stay about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam.
As she's feeding the material through, she's pulling the material on both sides to keep the stitch as close to the seam as possible. Make sure you don't sew through your zipper.
Zipper's out.
You definitely don't want to sew through that zipper flap, so you notice it's laying to the right.
Okay, and your front's here, so make sure that that's plenty far back enough. Pull it tight. Following this edge just the same as we did like on the other side. With your zipper and your flap pulled out, make sure that your seam is going into the top panel where we're doing our top stitching.
Let's skip ahead and show the end of this top stitch. You can see here the tail is a little bit too long. We'll show you what we'll do with that next.
Okay, and then back tack at the very end here, because we're going to be cutting off the end of this and putting a piece of binding across it. Okay, in this area, however you want to finish this off is fine. We're going to do a piece of binding with it. You can actually angle it up to that point. You could put a piece of binding just across this edge, or you can cut it across here, straight across, and run your binding right across here. You should have plenty of binding left over. Just simply take a small piece like this, fold it over, and it'll give you the finished edge. You can base that on. I'll go right through the center of it. Just take a small piece here. Just put it right over the edge.
Once it's sewn in place, you can trim the ends with scissors or use a hot knife.
And there's the end of our tail. Okay, now we are to the point where we can put our back zipper facing down. And this one will not be moved at all. You just want to work it down to where it's flat, and then we're going to strike a line right at the zipper. And you want to be sure that it's laying flat and then work out toward the zipper.
Deb's using the soapstone pencil again, and she's marking along the entire length of the zipper, being sure that the sleeve is flat against the top. Take your time here. Accuracy is important. If you need to get a second helper to help lay the sleeve flat, please do that. We're going to spend the time to show this whole process on this side because this is an important step. Now that we have that done, we'll do the same procedure to the other side. We won't show all of it on this side.
Okay, now we've got a line all the way across there. We're going to base this inside edge of the zipper because it's going to lay flat. And again, you want to keep your tape as close to the edge without going over it, so it'll be away from the teeth. Okay, now we have our lines marked, we have our basting tape ready and our zipper. Now, one way to try to get these zippers straight starting on here is the center marks. I don't know if you can see them still, they're kind of worn, but we can go right straight out from our center marks onto the top. And that gives us a better idea of where the center is up here. That way it won't put a twist in the zipper when it fits on. So you can kind of see where we're falling with that center mark. So we want to fall about the same when we start our zippers here. As you see, this one fell a little bit closer. We're about a ½ inch there and about a ¼ of an inch over here. So we're going to start a ½ inch from our center mark here and baste it right over to our line. And then we're going to baste it down. And I suggest that you baste one zipper down and sew it and then go on to the other one. That way you're not making different places where it may pull a basting tape up here, and then you'll be right back at the beginning basting. Oh, look at that. All right into place. Okay, so we're going to come back up here, and I noticed that it did come down just a little bit from there, and that's due to the slide. So we want to slide that down just a bit, and your basting tape probably is going to come up because of the bulk that we have on our double slider inside. Yours should have a single slide like we had discussed earlier. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start here, and we're going to sew that zipper on. And again, you want to do some back stitching here at the beginning. And just follow your zipper down. Once you get part of the zipper sewn down, then go ahead and put your needle into the zipper, lift your foot up. And just continue down. And do some back stitches here. Okay, we're done with the first side. Now we'll go on to the second side and do the same thing.
Follow the same procedure for the opposite side.
We have our big hole here that we cut earlier. And what I like to do is first mark a line, because we know we have a 1-inch binding onto the back. So we want to have at least a 1/2 inch to tuck in underneath there. So if you measure out here 1.5 inches, we'll have all of that 1/2 inch to work with. So where this is stitched around the outside edge, you know you're at the edge of your window already. So if you just measure out from these stitches 1.5 inches, and we can cut the umbrella out 1.5 inches all the way around the inside of these stitches, then we know that we'll have enough to tuck underneath and finish our window out completely. And I just kind of draw an 1.5 inch line. Might not be the best, but we do have a little bit of a variance so that we can trim it down to straighten our lines out as we go. Okay, now we have the perimeter drawn all the way around that we want for more or less our hems that we're going to have for tuck under. So now we go to this big hole that we have here and just cut up and start cutting around your line. Makes it so much easier than trying to fight to get the canvas up away from the window. And this edge is going to be tucked underneath itself, so you don't have to worry about any raw edges at this point. And then when you come up to the corner, you want to go about halfway between the points and cut it in. And that'll relieve it so that they can both flip the direction that they need to. Just be very careful that you're not scratching your window when you go in to cut that. And then just cut up toward that corner, like I said, about halfway. And then what's going to happen is we're going to tuck this all under here. And as you can see, our binding is on the other side of the glass. And this should tuck right underneath that binding and come out even with the edge of it, so everything's hidden.
We'll do that around the entire perimeter, cutting miters at each corner.
Halfway. Now when you get into an inside curve, you may have to cut it just a little bit if you end up with a curve such as this one where we sewn down here. We don't have that on our window. But if your window does come down, say, and follow a curve such as this, then you'll want to take a few extra cuts in there to relieve it, so when you fold it over, it's not binding up. But then you just take the edge and tuck it down.
This makes a beautiful edge along the outside of your Dodger, and also because the binding's on the inside, it too looks finished. Do this around the entire perimeter.
And it stays under pretty well because it's tight down to the glass. And you have your square corner. Your miter falls in. Okay, now we have our tucks all done all the way around the window, and you want to keep your tissue for this process too. Just leave it where it was, only one layer of tissue. We're going to go ahead and just sew this down, and this tissue is going to be sewn right to it, and seeing how it's a lighter tissue fabric, it'll pull right off, and you don't have to worry about scratching your window in the process of sewing around your binding to your fold over seam here.
This is your choice. You do have to peel away the paper, and it does leave some residue in the seam, so you need to decide whether or not you want to sew through the paper or take the paper out and just be careful with the glass as you sew it.
And you want to sew right close to the edge.
If you'd like to use the tissue paper, you could fold it back so that you're not sewing into it, just to help protect the glass. If you're careful, you'll prevent scratches. But using the paper like this is a good idea, so you don't have to worry at all about the glass. It just leaves some residue in our stitch line. You'll see that when we're done. Sew around the entire perimeter, keeping as close to that edge as possible, about an 1/8 inch away from the hem.
Okay, and again, come up to the corner, leave your needle in, and rotate.
And here we are in the final stitch.
Then I'm just going to turn here again to do my back stitch again. They're all tied in the same point. All sewn in. Take this top, flip it down, flip the top over. Paper is actually perforated. Tear this off. And if there is a little bit of paper left under the stitches, it's only tissue paper, so it will come off. Even a wet cloth will just wash it right out of your stitching. But it keeps your window from being all scratched from you moving it around to sew it in.